Hi everyone, here's the Book Chemist once again. Today I'm reviewing Effi Briest by Theodore Fontane, widely regarded as one of the great works of 19th century German literature, and a novel that I once heard it called the great masterpiece of 19th century fiction, together with Anna Karenina by Tolstoy and Madame Bovary by Flaubert, all three novels about women facing marital unhappiness and adultery. I guess the topic stimulated and interested 19th century Europeans, at least the 19th century Europeans of the type that wrote and read novels, because I believe, and obviously because of its broader implications for the relationships of power within European society, and hopefully I'll be able to say a bit more about that in the course of my review. There's definitely something thrilling but terribly sinister in the beginning of certain naturalist, realist novel, let's use realism as an umbrella, very broad term, where everything's just going well for the characters, where marriages are organized and planned and honeymoons go overall quite positively. You get this a lot in Thomas Hardy novels, and the impression is that all this happiness will only create the premises for the character's eventual downfall and misery. The first thing that struck me in Effi Briest is how wonderfully paced the novel is, and how Fontane is great. He's really masterful at packing certain events, the implications of very wide stretches of time within the span of just a few pages. When Effi, who gets engaged to her husband very, very early in the novel, within the first few pages, when she and her mother go to Berlin, basically to buy all of the things Effi will need as a married woman, you get a full impression of this trip, of the serenity of the trip, of how much fun they had, of the relationship that developed between Effi and her cousin. Cousin Briest will be a quite significant secondary character in the novel, and you get all of these impressions within the span of just a few paragraphs, and without Fontane actually telling you anything, or at least not much at all, about the trip. It's all in the impressions you're given, in the report of how the characters feel once they're back from the trip, that you're able to reconstruct this entire scene, and you already feel certain implications for the broader plot. You already perceive that perhaps in the way she's living this crucial moment in her life, Effi's outlook is still quite childish. It's still that of a young person full of wonder, full of curiosity, but maybe someone who's not ready for the relatively isolated life she's going to lead. Really, in a way that's very subtle, it's not at all on the nose, but is still quite perceivable. The novel is very good through the voices of its characters, through what the narrator chooses to emphasize when a certain scene is presented, where certain events are recollected. The novel is very good at offering its own commentary. And what happens in the course of Effi Briest is that each new event, each new detail that gets added to the plot, each new character somehow sheds new light on what was going on before. And in a way, because of Effi's movement through space, but because of the novel's structure too, this is very much a circular novel. And ideally speaking, what you should do once you finish the book is go back to the beginning and read it again in its entirety, in light of everything you've discovered, and pick up certain traces of events to come that were already present in the early chapters, and certain masterful turns of phrases that foreshadowed later tragedies. Effi Briest is also a beautiful portrayal of German society at the end of the 19th century. Because Effi comes from a noble family and she marries an ambitious and successful politician whose career we see develop in the course of the novel, we get a few different perspectives on this evolving, very mobile, very optimistic society where everybody is striving toward achieving new levels of progress, new levels of ease for the nation at large, of course meaning mostly for the bourgeoisie and the wealthier classes, and there is this sense of great unrest. In one of the most ominous passages in the book, you see certain members of the German military discussing, and you have these young men, these young soldiers, complaining about the empty space on their jackets where all their medals should be. And the book, it was published in book form in 1895, and it's quite ominous to read it from a modern perspective and to know about, well, the Great War, where when these men and these people will actually be given a chance to earn those horrible medals. Effi Briest is also, and I would argue mostly and most importantly, a ghost story. There's a ghost in this book that plays a very important part. I would argue it's one of the most central, if not the most central element in the entire book, even though it never becomes too central to the plot. The ghost always remains on to the side of the main narrative, which in my opinion is where supernatural elements belong. That's the wrong way to put it, it's a bit too prescriptive, but what I want to say is that in most of the novels I tend to love, books by people like Jennifer Egan, Umberto Eco, Michael Chabon, Thomas Pynchon, Jonathan Lethem, supernatural elements are always present. There's always ghosts, magic rings, strange cursed pools or castles, but these elements never become the be-all end-all of the plot. They are always kept to the side of the narrative. They always intrude in the narrative just in a few crucial passages and always remain at the back of your head while you're reading the book. And in this way, their fascination and their charm and mystery is always alive and always present. When you focus too much on the ghost in a ghost story, when you analyze it too closely, that inevitably tends to take away some of its fascination. It's the reason why ghost stories are arguably much more popular and much more successful than ghost novels. It's difficult to sustain the mystery and the fascination for a very prolonged period of time. But that is not to say that the ghost is just mentioned and left aside and just treated as a bit of a treat, as a bit of fan service for the readers, just something to keep you interested as you read about this woman's married life. In fact, the ghost revelation and the ghost nature, once it's discovered, I would argue is one of the most shocking and brilliant twists I've read in a long time. Innstettin, Effi's husband, this low-level politician from the provinces who has ambitions to move to Berlin and make his name with the Kaiser and with Germany's ruling class, he is a wonderfully complex character, and I'm still not sure whether I even like the guy. Well, I don't like the guy. I don't think he's a likable guy from a modern perspective at all. Inevitably, he is somewhat between, he's somewhat of a mixture of St. John Rivers from Jane Eyre, which in my recent review I compared to Satan, and of Mr. Phillotson, that's the name, from Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy. He is a cunning character, and he is very determined and very driven, but somehow he is also incredibly dull. And he is evil, and the evil he commits comes more from his dull side and from his propriety, his wish to conform to expectations, society's expectations of him, and to appear as an upstanding German citizen. It comes more out of that than out of his sinister, ambitious side. He is manipulative, he is cruel, and yet at the end of the day it's very difficult to think of Innstettin, for me at least, as a full-fledged villain. The way I look at him is as a man that, for all that is respected and revered by people, he is inevitably just very weak and has a very weak will, and again relies more on on society's expectations than on his own good sense to decide what to do in life when difficult situations strike him. And in this sense, and if I say that it's difficult for me to imagine him as a just a vaudeville villain, that's because of Fontane's wonderful psychological characterization of this man that makes it so hard, just as all great literature does. It makes it very hard not to understand the broader societal, personal, humane reasons that made these people the way they are. Which, by the way, I think it's important to remark, is a much more complicated game than just the classic moralistic tale of, oh, the bad guy in the novel is only evil because his mom never hugged him. It's more complicated than that, and doesn't at all prevent us at the end of the day from still considering them criminal and wrong and awful as human beings. That idea of society and society's expectations clashing with people's inner moral compasses is really at the heart of the book. All of the misery that happens in the course of the novel, all of the horrible things that befell the characters, Effi Briest most notably, come out of society's written and unwritten rules on how people should behave, how a proper married couple should behave, what a rich or noble family should do to advance in society and to make sure their name is preserved. And all of these goes to the detriment of people's own happiness and on what they actually want to do with their lives. And this clash of what's proper and what's morally good is also at the heart of another very different book I reviewed recently, which is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. It's it's another one of those big 19th century topics because of the way the individual's personality and preferences and outlook on life was going to become more and more important when contrasted with the importance again of society, of broader nations, political parties, political systems, ruling classes, and so on and so forth. I think what gives Effi Briest a lot of its genius is the way Fontane can show that this society I was telling you about, this modern society, this nation that wants to become one of the leading nations on earth, that thinks of itself as at the vanguard of Europe as a continent, as a system of nations, can at the same time rely on ideals and structures and rituals that are barbaric, that are violent and unjust. And there are some wonderful moments in the course of the novel. For instance, there's a beautiful passage where Effie sees some sacrificial stones and altars in a German forest, when the ancient past of Europe, a past of warring tribes, a past of warrior kingdoms constantly fighting each other in an endless cycle of violence, a place where really the strongest ruled and the weaker people in society could only suffer and could only obey. There is this sense that the novel is pushing. It was definitely pushing me to wonder whether that past is as ancient as we like to pretend, or whether things are actually closer to those dark ages, even these days, even, well, in the 19th century, and obviously we have to wonder even today. I lost the beginning of that sentence. You get what I mean, I think. Is today good? Maybe not. The real triumphs of the book are a few scenes, especially toward the end, where Effie's full humanity emerges. Effi Briest is not an angel. Among other things, she can be quite childish and spoiled. She is cruel, and she's not below mocking a good friend of her called Alonso, who has a physical handicap. And she can be quite cruel when she speaks about him. But at the same time, for all that the two things I just mentioned will make her sound like an asshole, at the same time, you have to believe me, I do think that she is a good person overall, as much as you can hope for people to be good. And the moments where the cruelties that are played out against her, the injustices that she has to face, when these things break her, these moments are moments where her full humanity comes out, where she loses her temper, where she just, well, hates everyone and everything that's happening to her, where she just abandons herself to despair. And in these moments, her humanity fully emerges, and she becomes one of the most well-rounded, one of the most complex and wonderfully portrayed characters I've encountered, definitely in classic fiction. For that reason, and the next bit of the video is going to be a bit spoilery, so don't watch it if you haven't read the novel. Go and read Effi Briest. It's a classic. It's not even up to me to recommend it. It's definitely part of the canon. For that reason, spoiler ahead, I'm not 100% convinced by the novel's ending, where Effie, on her deathbed, forgives Innstettin, and she turns into this angelic, celestial creature. I thought that kind of took something away from her great moments of rage and of anger that made her, those moments that made her so human. But at the same time, is it a bad thing that she forgives Innstettin? At the end of the day, what is she supposed to do? Just be devoured by anger and spite until her final breath? You know, these are difficult questions and go beyond literature, really, go beyond, they relate with how you think about moral matters, more broadly speaking. I do like, what I really did like were the very final pages of the novel, the final couple of pages where you have these characters, actually Effie's parents, talking about her life, talking about her downfall, her tragedy, and wondering, well, perhaps she was simply too young to get married. And it's a sinister, it's a cruel conversation. It's the kind of conversation they should have had maybe a few years ago. But at the same time, I get the feeling that they miss the broader point, and they dismiss this complex scenario where she was doomed by the laws of society to endless suffering. They dismissed it as maybe she wasn't cut out for the situation. It reminded me a lot, it reminded me of one of my favorite endings in literature, which is the last few pages of Mastro Don Gesualdo, which is another, it's a it's a novel from Italian Verismo, let's call it another naturalist novel, where the eventual fate of a character is discussed by people who kind of at the same time nail his predicament and miss the broader point about this character's life. But it's difficult to talk about it without talking about Verga's Mastro Don Gesualdo. Go read it. It's an amazing novel. I love Verga very much. By the way, the portrayal of the coastal town where Effie lives with Innstettin during the first years of their marriage, it's wonderful. I feel like I was there. You really get a sense of what living in this isolated community on the North Sea was like, the importance that social events, parties, banquets come to assume, how looking at the window and seeing people pass by is sometimes the only thing that puts you in touch with human life beyond the confines of your house. It's a portrayal of an isolated society in cold wastes that is up there definitely with Ethan Frome, another novel I talked about recently. Although I think compared to Ethan Frome's New England, even Kessin, which is the town where Effi Briest lives for a while, is basically the Lower East Side, really. Overall, Effi Briest is a masterpiece of fiction. It's breathtaking in how it displays Fontane's masterful use of the techniques and the tricks of realist novelists. It's a must-read for anyone who's interested in the evolution of the novel, in classic fiction and literature, in 19th century literature, and I couldn't recommend it highly enough. I'm really curious to read from you guys to see if the novel is still widely read. I'm not quite sure how widely read German literature is beyond Germany and beyond Europe. So I'm really curious to see if this is it's a bestseller where you are from, or if it's considered a rather obscure work of fiction. I definitely don't think it enjoys the same popularity as Anna Karenina and Madame Bovary. Does it deserve it? I think it does. Why not? It is a masterpiece after all. I look forward to discussing the novel and other Fontane novels in the comment section as always, and thank you so much for watching the video. Bye everyone.